here.
But you still want to be.
You can't.
Yeah, of course.
Barely.
Can't too.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Even last week when I was listening outside, I can see why they were complaining. I couldn't really hear very well at all. We'll all do that for like part of the meeting. We'll just go up close and make it look like we're talking.
Okay, I'll call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the Town of Oliver, Tuesday, September 8th, 2020, to order, and ask the CAO if we have any late items.
No, there are no late items, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. Councillor Ventimiglia, Councillor Schwarzenberger. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item D, adoption of prior minutes. Ask for a motion to adopt. Councillor Ventimiglia. Mayor Johansen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to business item E1, Heritage Designation Bylaw discussion. With S. Morhun of Oliver and District Heritage Society. And I'll ask Ms. Morhun to come up to the podium, please. Or Mr. Houle.
No.
Yeah, I'm turning it on.
Hello?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have Sue Morhun from the Heritage Society. At the previous council meeting, I introduced Heritage Procedure Bylaw, which had provisions for adding and removing a property from the Community Heritage Register, procedures for adopting a Heritage Designation Bylaw for a specific property or structure, and procedures for the issuance of heritage alteration permits. At that meeting, there was some questions from council about the significance of heritage alteration permits and heritage bylaws, so that's why we have summoned Sue here to present, so she'll have some words for you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of council. This is a little bit of deja vu for me, because for many years I served as the heritage planner for the township of Langley. And I used to do this kind of stuff with a regular basis. So I've had to search back in my memories about 10 or 12 years ago to get things brushed off a little bit. I was asked to speak today to 4 questions that I gather were raised by council when you first reviewed Heritage Procedures Bylaw 1395. Why is the bylaw important? What is the advantage for private property owners? How might it affect property values? And does it open the possibility for grants? So why is it important? A Heritage Procedures Bylaw is a proactive management tool for the community. And I applaud this initiative based on my previous experience working in the heritage conservation field for over 30 years. It begins to establish a consistent guide for future councils, for staff, and the community about how important assets might be both preserved and then managed for the benefit of current and future generations, and making sure that that's done in a fair and equitable manner. It brings clarity and consistency to the management table, especially in enabling very specific action steps to be taken. And it ensures that the related processes are in keeping with the Local Government Act. That's always important from a council perspective, I know. It ensures that the related processes are in keeping, at the same time that it opens the doors to improving local heritage conservation initiatives over time. I know it probably seems theoretical at first, and I can appreciate that, but my experience is that it becomes very practical in short order when you are dealing with a number of issues that may arise. Having a well-understood and level playing field saves everyone time, money, and angst. So I want to step back just a little bit and give you some background, because this bylaw builds on actions taken by previous councils over the years. Actions that began back in the early 1980s with the formal protection of 2 of 3 the earliest heritage buildings built in Oliver. And I'm speaking of the designation of the BC Police Building, which we now refer to largely as the museum. That was done in 1980. And the CPR station in 1983, which most people refer to as the, what do they refer it as these days? Yeah, it's a visitor center mostly, isn't it? Yeah. This initiative for designating those two buildings was followed first in the mid-1980s and then again in the mid-1990s with two successful funding referendums, which provides cost-effective financial support for the preservation of the community's heritage by knowledgeable community volunteers working in partnership with local government. And namely, those volunteers rise with the Oliver and District Heritage Society, but not exclusively so. The Society was subsequently able to be an active participant in the province's efforts back in the 1990s to undertake a massive rewrite of provincial heritage legislation, one that was designed to give local and regional governments the tools to manage their historic assets. And it took time for the communities to learn how to use these tools, and I know I was in the middle of that learning. But it wasn't until 2005, I should say, that the town and the Heritage Society were able to take advantage of newly available federal and provincial funds through what was known as the Historic Places Initiative to undertake a community consultation process to begin some really important baseline planning, and it created a document that you now know as the Community Heritage Register. This first iteration was adopted by Town Council in 2007. And quite simply, you have to know what you have and know why it's important before you can figure out what you're going to do with it and why you should invest the time and the money. So what's the value of having a register, a community heritage register? Well, it includes both publicly and privately owned heritage assets. And it's simply a listing of those important historic resources, a listing that's kept for planning purposes. It identifies assets that the community has inherited, that they value or believe in, and that we like to see kept. And those assets can be important singly or collectively. They can be publicly or privately owned. But all of them give both the individuals and the larger community a sense of place and of pride. They inform us what makes us unique and different, what sets us apart from other places, what makes us special, what came before and shaped us. It provides a base on which to build and grow as things change around us, and as we know, change is inevitable. So how do we use that register and we make it work for us? Well, there are rarely two circumstances that are the same. And the beauty of the legislative toolkit that's now available in British Columbia, and is the envy, I must say, of other provinces in Canada, is that we can pick and choose what will work best for us in any given situation. And the heritage bylaw that's being proposed begins to help you as a council take advantage of that flexible legislative environment by focusing in on one particular form of protection, the form that this community has used before, heritage designation. They did that 40 years ago, and things have changed since those first legislative tools came into play in this community. Specifically, Bylaw 1395 outlines how Council can provide protection using a heritage designation bylaw. For a publicly owned asset, this form of protection opens the doors to secure outside funding for the stabilization and restoration of that resource and when the need arises. That funding can come from provincial government, from federal government, and sometimes it can come from another nonprofit agency that has funding for that particular purpose. For example, in the last few years, $30,000 in senior government funding was used to restore and improve the performance of the critical character-defining elements on the 97-year-old BC police station that, of course, is owned by the town of Oliver. And namely, it was used to replicate the shake roof that was original to that building and repairing the original wood windows. And incidentally, the CPR station is eligible to ask for similar support when the need arises. And that would extend to the South Okanagan Lands Project Office, better known as the Town Hall these days, if it was formally protected as well. While I am aware of a few instances where a private owner has asked that their property be protected by a designation bylaw, this is not a common occurrence. There are better and, quite frankly, more attractive tools to use. And some examples of those tools include protecting with a less intrusive heritage conservation covenant, or negotiating a heritage revitalization agreement, or being part of a formally constituted heritage conservation area, or accessing a modest local government grant program. And while these types of tools are not under consideration today, I'm only noting them to let you know that there are incentives and ways to incentivize privately owned heritage property. And in an aside, those options are accompanied by ways in which you can also protect the public investment in privately owned property. Finally, I was asked to speak about property values and how those are impacted when a property is deemed publicly to have heritage value. Well, a study on behalf of the province's Heritage Branch done about a dozen years ago by the City Program at Simon Fraser University confirmed the experience in other jurisdictions across Canada, the United States, Britain, other parts of Europe, and even down under in Australia and New Zealand. Generally speaking, well-maintained heritage buildings hold their value better over time, and they are less susceptible to violent swings in the marketplace. There were sidebar benefits that were also noted in that study. First was the retention of older buildings, and their sensitive adaptive use is an important ingredient in responding to ensuring effective climate change action. The mantra here is the greenest building is the building already built. Secondly, exterior restoration and its often accompanying interior renovations are good for the local economy and good for job creation. So those are my comments based on the 4 questions that were posed to me. I'm willing to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Sue. Mayor and Council, any questions? Councilor Ventimiglia?
I don't have a question so much as just a comment. Thank you for the clarification, Sue. I think when we saw this report first a couple of weeks ago, the question that I think I heard a couple of times, or that we seemed to be wondering about, was the fact that we currently have 2 designated heritage buildings. We're looking for a 3rd, and this heritage bylaw seemed to be asking like you pay a fee to apply to make a change, so we're asking ourselves to pay a fee to ourselves. Like, there was a bit of confusion there.
Yeah.
But it helps with your clarification that over time, we're basically setting the groundwork that future councils and future landowners can follow, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. And in my experience, other councils that I have reported to or worked with have imposed a minimal fee to encourage heritage preservation to continue, because at some point you might be taxing yourself.
Mayor Johansen?
Thank you. I understand the premise of a protection bylaw protecting facilities like the CPR station and the old RCMP station, which is now the museum. I'm just wondering about going a little further and understanding the heritage designation, because there was a number of properties, probably a dozen or more, that had a designation. The theater, for example, has a heritage designation, but it doesn't protect the property. You can basically the owner of the building can basically do whatever they want to it and change colors. I'm just wondering what the real value of that heritage designation, considering that it can be asked for and it can be removed, and it doesn't really protect the facility, it just identifies it as a heritage structure. And some of them, with all due respect, you would be challenged to see the heritage value in that building. There may be more of a story attached to it as opposed to the architecture or something like that.
Yeah, the word designation is kind of a loaded word. Designation in my world is formal protection, and that's done by bylaw. Your community heritage register is simply a listing, a noting that these assets in our community are deemed to have heritage values. And so the theater would fall into that. The runway, the airport is on that list. It could be deemed to have heritage value as well, but it's not formally protected in any way at all. The only way to protect is through enabling legislation, and you have done that twice in Oliver.
Just as a follow-up, so the increase in property value or maintaining a property values, there's really no, like what is the actual benefit of having your building or that house or that business, or, as on that list, so to speak?
It's on the list, and when it comes up for change, for instance, somebody applies for a demolition permit or a building permit to add on, gives the local government the opportunity to say to the owner, did you know that there are strong heritage values that are associated with this property? And this is what those are. How can we work together to achieve preservation and let you continue on to do what you need to do or want to do? That is not covered by designation. That's covered by those other kinds of tools that I listed, like a heritage revitalization agreement, by a grant program that's administered by local government.
Just one more follow-up. Just would those heritage designation buildings qualify for grant funding or
Heritage listed buildings.
heritage listed buildings?
Yeah, heritage list, and there's a difference between listing and designation. Designation is a formal action that's taken by council.
Right.
Listing is just a list.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was on a similar vein as the mayor, I think, in that a privately held home that has, or business that has designation or heritage value, do they have to be designated by the town or the municipality in order to get grant funding, or can they get that kind of thing if they wanted to do some sort of restoration without formal designation by the town?
So if it's privately owned property, it's treated differently than publicly owned property. Publicly owned property, like owned by the town, like owned by a service group, would be eligible under certain circumstances for grant funding from senior governments or from another agency. If it is privately owned, then you have to go into the toolkit that I talked about, and if you ever are tired at night, you might want to have a look at this document. And it's better than looking at legislation, believe me. And you go shopping. That's what I used to say when I was dealing in Langley with individual owners of listed heritage property. What is it you want to do? What do you want to achieve? Why? Here's what we as a community would like to achieve. Now let's figure out how we can do this in a way that will work for both parties. And we can step into that legislation and see what's available to be used. And so in those instances, I was often working with the Director of Engineering, the Long Range Planner, the Development Planner, the Chief Building Inspector. And we would bring a team together to figure out what needed to be done and how we could best go about doing it, and at the least possible cost.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Ventimiglia?
Thank you. I just wanted to just repeat something that you said in your presentation just about the heritage registry, because I think we were struggling with that a bit. What's the benefit? But you said at some point that this heritage registry helps to inform us about what makes us as a community unique, what came before us and what shapes us. So it helps now and 50 and 100 years down the road to tell our story, and I thought that that was worth repeating.
Thank you. And if you're doing a good thing by your heritage and your community, you go back and you revisit that list maybe every 10 years and say, what has changed? What is still valid? And then you make the changes that are needed at that time.
Sue, does the Heritage Society intend to be reaching out to private property owners on the registry to encourage them to seek designation?
Well, not designation, but protection, or maybe some support for doing what they're doing. But before we do that, we need to have some of those supports in place. And the first step of figuring what that program might look like is what is before you today, looking at the designation. Quite frankly, the Heritage Society has been up to its eyeballs in quite a number of things to dealing with artifacts, and I think you'll agree with me. Juliana is here, our executive director of the Society, looking after artifacts and archival material and getting ourselves in a much better position because we've had better and improved funding in the last 10 years or so, and part of it thanks to work done by Councillor Mattis. We are slowly positioning ourselves to be able to reach out then beyond those internal kind of things that we do all the time and saying to individual property owners, how can we all work together? And we have to do that lockstep with the local government of the day.
Any other questions or comments?
No, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sue.
Can I begin, or finish, I should say, by saying thank you to you, members of council, and to your staff. I'm saying thank you to you for proceeding with the plaque to commemorate the completion of the irrigation canal in 1920. And I'm also saying thank you to you for working hard to get a plaque and a statue in place in the new park that commemorates the important role, the life-giving role of the Okanagan River and the role of our First Nations in being the protectors of that river. It was too bad that COVID has gotten in the way for us to have a bigger celebration. But I'm pretty delighted, personally, to see that work in recognizing those two important historic landmarks carried on. And I look forward to whatever happens next year, which is Oliver's 100th anniversary of emerging from those two initiatives, the ditch and the river. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Okay, on to item E2, 2021 council appointments, and I will refer to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Chairman Grice. The report before council this afternoon for the 2021 council appointments is providing the opportunity for council to discuss the status of existing standing, select, and other bodies, community committees, consideration for additional committees, and to consider appointments to outside boards and committees. The list I attached to the report is available for you to review and to make changes for 2021. I've also attached, yes, the attached is the complete listing of the current appointments for 2020. Also want to point out that for our existing select committees of council, the Airport Advisory Committee, there is one membership vacant in the community. Oliver Downtown and Revitalization Committee, that membership is full and in all categories. And the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee, we have one vacancy in our member of large group. The age-friendly assessment, that process is starting and establishing just a working group to help the consultants with the public engagement process. As the Food Advisory Action Committee, we're very active in the community. We invited for a membership from that committee, and the former co-chair, David Cassian, has agreed to participate. We also reached out to Councillors Ventimiglia and Grice, and at this point, Councillor Grice has confirmed her participation, but I didn't want to restrict it just to Councillors Ventimiglia and Grice because they were on the Food Action Advisory. That's how that occurred, but we would welcome any other members of council if they wish to participate in that working group. The Regional District Okanagan-Similkameen, that's part of the process for them as well, is to provide who the director for the town of Oliver will be and its alternate, and they request that the week of November 5th. So we bring this forward for council to review. My recommendation is that we bring this back to the September 21st, 2020 meeting. However, Mayor Johansen thought there may be opportunity to review the listing at this meeting and make appointments as we're here today. So I will leave it for council's discussion and decision on how you want to proceed.
Thank you, Corporate Officer. So I guess if we want to just go down the list then, starting with RDOS.
One, two, and help in case they go crazy.
Anyone wants to?
Sure,
Sean?
I'm stuck out of agenda notes. I'm trying to get back in.
Oh,
Sorry.
are you? Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity to go through there. We didn't see too many changes last year, and I suspect there may not be too many this year. For me, the big change, and I had mentioned it last year, was that I would be looking for council's support to go to the appointment position on the RDOS. Councillor Ventimiglia has done a fantastic job there for sure, and also has led the charge in healthcare in the regional health district, and that is also something that I am working toward to get the chair position in the regional health district as well. And I would like Councillor Ventimiglia to continue in the alternate position. I think her knowledge in there as an alternate is important and could be very helpful, particularly with the regional health district.
Any comments?
I'm good with that.
I'd support that. Okay, moving on to Okanagan Regional Library. Do you see any changes there? Council Manager, happy? Councilor
Only if
Schwarzenberger?
somebody else wants the job. I'm more than happy to keep it.
And I'm fine being the alternate.
Okay, Parks and Rec, I'm happy to stay there if somebody else was chomping at the bit to take over. I think this was my first year, so I wouldn't mind at least having one more year.
And I'm fine staying as the alternate again.
Oliver and District Heritage Society, Mayor Johansen, are you okay there?
Yeah, I'm fine there. Been there 1 year. It's been an interesting process for sure. Learning lots of things about the Heritage Society. So just started to get into it, and then now we're meeting virtually, unfortunately, but still I'm interested to continue in that role.
Councillor Ventimiglia, I know you've stepped away, but are you okay to stay as the alternate for the Heritage Society?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that was a yes. Okay, then Airport Advisory Committee, we have Councillor Mattes with Councillor Ventimiglia as the alternate.
That's actually not alternate. There's two members.
Oh,
of
is it two
council.
members? I see,
Yeah.
okay.
It's the same with all three of those committees.
Thank you. Are you, oh, I see that. Are you happy to stay on there?
I'm more than happy. If it'll make it easier, I don't know if anybody wants any other changes. And if they do, it may be easier if they just speak up.
Sure, we could do that. Mayor Johansen?
As chair of the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee, I would ask Councillor Grice if she would like to switch and be the chair of that committee. Give her the opportunity.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
And I would stay as a second member unless anybody else would like to be part of that committee.
Fine.
Great. Any other comments on committees? Councillor Ventimiglia, are you feeling left out here? Do you need to look this over? Or? Do you want to cheat off to somebody's?
The only,
Or I guess- there.
You're welcome to.
I don't think that
There were any changes?
Are you okay with airport?
Yeah, yeah. I would be the same as Councillor Mattis. If anybody's desperate to give airport a go, I'd be happy to hand it over, but I'm also happy to stay. There's not too many meetings a year for that, and
Speak to the mic.
Okay, so I think we're okay here with the rest of the appointments? Going once, going twice?
Well, you got the whole next page.
Oh, I think we were just going to, if there were any that we wanted to. I mean, I can go line by line still if we prefer. There's airport advisory, downtown revitalization, Councillor Schwarzenberger and myself. CSCP, we've discussed. School District 53, I don't recall being called to a meeting. Sister City. Good. Chamber of Commerce, I'm happy to stay there. Hospital Liaison.
Councillor Ventimiglia, would you like to go to the appointment of the hospital liaison? That was one that we switched last year with your role in the regional district. Now that we've switched that, sort of tag team, we've been working together on it as well, but officially maybe being named as the appointment, and I'll go as the alternate on that one.
sure, yeah, I think it's worked well, kind of doubling up. Yeah, I would be happy to. Thank you.
Children and Youth. You okay?
Yep.
Good, okay. MIA.
That was done primarily for the UBCM meeting, which is all virtual this year, so it was only because you needed to be there in person to vote, so it's fine the way it is. Do you plan on attending it virtually?
I do. I have
Yeah.
accepted the meeting, so.
There we go. Yeah, no, we're fine.
Okay. OTA.
I'm fine staying on for another year on OTA.
Yeah, it's been working quite well.
Good. Multicultural Services. Yep. And then, yeah, that's it. Okay, everyone's good? Happy? Then we'll move on to item E3, Bylaw Enforcement Service Update.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Thank you
Oh,
for
yes.
that, but we should do a motion to make those appointments that have been changed.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were bringing this forward to the next meeting.
Oh, we can do that too if you'd like.
Let's do it now.
Okay, since we're here, sure.
Okay, just if you'd like to give us a moment.
You bet.
Thank you. Perhaps it might be useful or to save some time while we're preparing that, you might want to go on to your next item and then come back to this one, if you're comfortable with that.
Yep, I am. Back to item E3 then, Bylaw Enforcement Services Update, and I will turn it over to the Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on bylaw enforcement services since the transition to an in-house proactive bylaw enforcement service. At the 2020 budget deliberations, Council opted to transition to an in-house proactive bylaw enforcement service, which included the hiring of a bylaw enforcement supervisor and a seasonal bylaw enforcement officer. Christine Dolbeck started as the bylaw enforcement supervisor at the beginning of June, along with Caitlin Bennett, who started at the beginning of June and was just seasonal, so she had just finished last week. The bylaw officers were visible in the community this summer, patrolling parks and other public areas in the new van and e-bike. There was a noticeable increase in calls requesting to speak directly to bylaw enforcement due to the new van being seen on the streets and at the parks. The new e-bike has been a great asset to actively monitor the parks during the peak season. The ability to get quickly from one location to the other has proved to be beneficial. The turnaround time for animal control complaints was immediate. Other bylaw complaints were responded to within a day. The time it takes to address the issues and close the file, is dependent on several factors, including if the property owner lives in town, how quickly the owner is willing to comply, etc. Some of the issues and challenges this summer were that bylaw officers were often not taken seriously at first point of contact due to the uniforms sort of being, they're the gray color. some brighter uniforms would help that. Some people often ask, who are you? You know, what are you doing here? So maybe some more reflective vests with the word bylaw and bigger writing would also be helpful. Park patrol was challenging this summer due to repeat offenders of the no smoking and no alcohol bylaws. RCMP were called in on a few occasions. Some things that might help this situation would be more signage in the parks and baseball diamonds. COVID obviously added another layer of challenges. Education was the only defense in maintaining compliance. Dealing with repeat offenders for unsightly properties, overgrown weeds or hoarding issues is something that bylaw constantly deals with. Educating dog owners on keeping their dogs on leash and letting them know of the off-leash areas and times allowed. Many residents in town do not have licenses for their dogs, which is something that we noticed out there. Proactive approach. Unsightly properties is something that bylaw is proactively approaching, whether it's driving around and seeing these complaints or taking in complaints from residents. This is something that we're actively going after. So overgrown weeds, puncture vine, those types of things. This continues to be a problem despite proactive letters each spring to property owners with no improvements. RVs being used as residences is something that we have noticed an increase in. So we're going to beef up the messaging on that throughout the fall, and there are some bylaw amendments that we can look at to make the language clearer. But that's something that we'll definitely be aiming to tackle throughout this winter, and next spring will be something that we'll be enforcing with more detail. COVID response is something that we've been proactive with as well. So going around to businesses, checking to see how they're dealing with COVID, their protocols, asking if there's any assistance that they need, pointing them to resources such as WorkSafe. That's something that we have been doing actively. Some successes with the program so thus far, all 5 dogs that came to the pound this summer were reunited with their owners in less than 72 hours. We spoke with many residents, tourists at the park, helping to build a sense of trust that their complaint would be acted upon quickly. We're building a more positive relationship with the transient workers than in the past. A major asset was having Chris, who's bilingual, dealing with the French Canadians, which was helpful. A big success was the pocket ashtray program. So approximately 8 out of 10 butts went in there, and there was no need for further argument or discussion or action. It's a good talking point. I don't know if council has seen them, but they're these little pocket ashtrays, and if you go out and present those to the people and say, hey, look, here, you can put your butt out in this, you're not allowed to smoke here, and be friendly about it, it seems to have been working. Some projects and tasks for the fall and winter are working extensively with historical nuisance properties to achieve compliance. Researching other municipalities on best approaches will be helpful in this matter. As I mentioned, amending the zoning bylaw regarding RVs, working on signage, working on boulevard education, so encouraging landscaping and better maintenance of these areas, discouraging parking large RVs on the boulevard. An opportunity would be to use the newsletter to inform residents of various bylaws and regulations such as CCANs, RVs, and boulevard maintenance. Another good approach this winter would be implementing a kindness program. So every time bylaw catches someone doing something good, they are recognized for it in the newsletter. Continuing to build strong relationships with parks and recreation. And another item would be enforcing vacant buildings and ensure vacant building registration permits are issued. Bylaw statistics have been attached to the report as well for your information. And with that, the recommendation is that council receive the bylaw enforcement update report as information. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Houle. Any questions, comments? Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you give a little more insight into the vacant building registration and permits? I'm not familiar with that.
Sure. In our Good Neighbor bylaw, there's a whole section that's dedicated to vacant buildings. So if a property is vacant, I'd have to have the bylaw in front of me, but if the property is vacant, they are supposed to take out a vacant building registration permit and follow certain guidelines, such as boarding it up. I could get the bylaw. I think that would be helpful, but the idea is people are supposed to take out a vacant building registration permit if the building is vacant.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on that same vein, we're not talking about a building that lost its tenant and is currently trying to rent it out again. We're talking about something that's been abandoned and needs to be boarded up, et cetera. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Councilman?
I did have another comment. I was more concerned when I read through this report with dealing with repeat offenders and unlicensed dogs. And I know we're trying to be gentle and get people to do it, but should we not be writing more tickets in that regard? I'd rather, you know, we try the soft approach for how often and how long, and then, you know, like if we have people with unlicensed dogs, to me, they should be getting a ticket. Maybe one warning. I don't know how the process works, or even how the bylaw reads regarding warnings and when the tickets will actually occur. To me, if your dog isn't licensed, there's sufficient warning. You should be getting a ticket. I don't know.
Director Hood?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something, maybe due to the number of unlicensed dogs, it's quite significant. So I think a better approach might be to, now that we are going more proactive, is to do over the next few months a bit of education in the newsletter, just to say, hey, look, you need a license for your dog, and then after that, obviously, start coming with more of a ticketing approach if people don't comply.
Mayor Johansen?
Can you comment on just how the relationship's going with the RCMP? I read in there some stories about people drinking in public places and basically not really being interested in listening. So I would hope that there is a relationship being established with the RCMP and support there if it's needed. I would imagine that we don't want to abuse that, but at the other end of the scale, when we need assistance, we should be able to get it.
Sure, I can actually, now would be a perfect time to pass it off to our bylaw enforcement supervisor. She can introduce herself and just comment a little bit more on the RCMP, because I know that she has a direct contact there that she does communicate with often, and they do have a good relationship, but I'll let her elaborate more on that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you, or at least see you for the first time. As Randy said, I came here in June and was made to feel very welcomed, so thank you for that. To address the issue with the working relationship with the RCMP, I'm pleased to say that they've been very supportive. In fact, they will include bylaw in team emails. They will encourage their members to assist us whenever it's required, and also when they do attend upon our request, we'll explain to the individual that it's imperative that whatever the offense is ends there and now, and they are to respect bylaw in the community. So far it's been a really good relationship. I'm feeling really confident, and it certainly makes me safer when I'm out in the community, knowing that I can call for backup when it's required. And I've done so, I think, roughly on 3 occasions, mostly for public intoxication. And it's good to know that we're all working for the same outcome, which is keeping the town of Oliver safe and free of any issues that are not welcomed.
Mayor Johansen?
Just as a follow-up, do you feel, maybe talk about maybe where areas that you feel like you would spend a little more effort, but you're challenged with the resources that are available to you? Like I'm sure some of the bylaws are a bit challenging because they're gray, but they're, after being in the town for 3 months, where would you like to be spending maybe more time, and if you were able to clean up some of those bylaws and make you, being able to deal with some problems sooner than later, are there areas in town, and I'll talk about like parking or different things like that, that you're basically not spending any time on? And saying you aren't spending any time on it, but you would like to spend more time?
There are definitely several bylaws that are consuming a large portion of our time. And then, of course, unfortunately, that leaves us very little time to delve into the other issues. So I think, as Randy indicated, by reviewing the bylaws over the course of the winter and making them a little more airtight, it will enable us to approach the spring and issues with that, such as the RVs and unsightly properties, in less time and less repeat visitations to the property or to the individual. As it stands now, unsightly properties and RVs are probably the top two that we're dealing with, and that's certainly where our resources are going to right now.
Mayor Johansen.
Just to continue up with the RVs, are we talking somebody renting a spot on their property so that someone can stay there in an RV, or is it another family member living in the RV that there's no room in the house, or is it like somebody renting an RV as a bed and breakfast or a VRBO? Like, is it all of them, or?
I would say the majority of them is RVs that are owned by the member of the house, and then it is used as a summer vacation for family, friends, and so forth. I suspect there is definitely a strong percentage also of people who are renting out their RVs as a VRBO option, definitely. But I think from what I'm seeing now, it's mostly a case of family members or people who have purchased lots in the town and they are in the process of building, and they are taking advantage, shall we say, of their purchase and staying there for extended periods of time. So those are things that, because the way the bylaw is worded, it is making it a little more challenging to enforce. We are keeping a pretty extensive record of the areas, and we'll certainly be following up on them in the spring once we've gone through our bylaw and amended it in a way where it gives us a bit more clarity when we're approaching the subject.
Thank you.
Councillor Schwarzenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Christine, I'd like to welcome you to Oliver.
Thank you.
You've only been here 3 months or 3 or 4 months, and great job that you and Caitlin did over the summertime. I think we had less complaints than we've ever had, I think. So good job. My one question was about uniforms, or what you thought you needed to get more respect out there from visitors and residents. Are we talking like just a vest that says bylaw across the back of it, and a logo, or are we talking something more than that?
Well, speaking with other officers, generally the standard colors are DV for the pants and usually some shade of blue. And also there is no crest or emblem of the town, the logo on it, simply the coat of arms on each arm, which designates enforcement, law enforcement. Certainly a vest would help. Most of the communities out there, probably 98% of them, all have a vest that clearly states bylaw on the front and in the back. So these are all things that, upon approaching a situation, clearly identifies us and lets the individual know that we're there for a specific reason. And it just helps to establish certain protocol. As it stands now, people are, even though we do identify ourselves when we approach a situation, it's not necessarily viewed as authoritative. And I think sometimes that's where it's lacking. But definitely, is there room for improvement? Absolutely. For this summer, did these shirts and so forth do the job? Of course. But moving forward, I think something with a bit more visual aid would help, certainly.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
No, great.
Mr. Black.
Thank you, everyone.
Councillor Schwarzenberger.
So I'll move that we receive the Development Services report on bylaw enforcement.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving back then to item E2. So we have a proposed motion. Anyone would care to move?
I'll move the proposed motion that council make the following changes to the 2021 year. To the committee appointments, RDOS Director would be Mayor Johansen, and the alternate would be Councillor Ventimiglia, and Hospital Liaison would be Councillor Ventimiglia, and the alternate would be Mayor Johansen. And the balance would stay from the 2020 appointments.
We had also changed CSCP as well, so that, yeah, CAO?
Had to turn my mic on. The change for the Community Safety and Crime Prevention can be done at the meeting. It's more of who's the chair,
Okay.
and it's done at the meeting there.
Good, then we have a motion to have a second. Sure. Councillor Ventimiglia, any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving to item E4, Community Housing Grant Update, and I will turn it over to Director Houle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to provide an update on the grant application thus far. So a development consultant's been hired, and the MOU is being created now with a local not-for-profit housing society. Phase 1 environmental site assessment has been completed with no issues. A surveyor and a geotechnical engineer are conducting studies on the property, meetings with architects this week. Just a bit of a design update. So the previous design, concept design, had 5,000 square feet of commercial space and 4 dwelling units on the main floor, town hall and council chambers on the second floor, and 2 floors of residential above. Initial discussions with the development consultant and the architect have revealed that it will be more expensive to sandwich the second floor town hall and council chambers in between the residential units due to the mechanical costs and plumbing costs associated. It'll be a bit more clear, Council, if you want to look up behind Councillor Grice on the screen, that it'll just show the existing design and the proposed new design. The updated proposal is to reduce main floor commercial space to 2,500 square feet, relocate town hall to the main level behind the commercial space while keeping council chambers and extra offices on the second level. 4 to 6 dwelling units will be located behind the council chambers on the second story, along with an outdoor amenity play area off the back deck. 2 floors of residential units will be above. Some of the benefits of this proposal: grouping the residential uses together means more convenient mechanical equipment and plumbing fixtures, elevator access, and lower overall costs. Reducing the size of the ground floor commercial space lowers the town-funded portions of the building. This places less risk that a large commercial space would be vacant. It's more convenient for customers having town hall on the main level for accessibility reasons. It allows for possible expansion of town hall on the main level if it wanted to expand into the commercial space at the front at a later date. It creates a separation between council chambers and the rest of town hall. So if customers came in for an evening meeting, they could go up the elevator to the second level to council chambers. It retains the animation, which is important, of the street frontage from having, you'd have a commercial frontage and it would retain the animation, sorry. Provides an opportunity for outside amenity space over town hall for a play area for families off the back deck. It's less complex leasing and operating agreements by having the residential units together. And just a note that all areas and units are approximate at this time, pending design. But we did want to show council this sort of revised approach before approaching an architect to do some drawings. Also, I wanted to update the National Housing Co-Investment Funding. There's another opportunity to apply for funding at a later date. It's actually grant applications at a later date that would accompany with BC Housing. So I'll explain that a little more. So in addition to the seed funding for the design work through CMHC, which we talked about in the past, and the project funding through BC Housing, there's an opportunity for forgivable loans through CMHC, provided that the following is met. So it is provided that it's an affordable housing project, provided that the building will achieve a 25% decrease in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions based on the 2015 National Building Code, or a 15% greenhouse gas decrease relative to the 2017 National Energy Code. It's provided that 20% of the units must meet or exceed accessibility standards, and its common areas must be barrier-free. It's important that there's a proximity to amenities and community supports, such as transit, grocery store, pharmacy, library, community center, and the business district, all of which would apply in this case. The forgivable loan amount will be determined using a scoring grid. Just an example, a project that our development consultant worked on in Fernie for a 35-unit building, $1.4 million was given as a forgivable loan, in this case from CMHC, in addition to the money from BC Housing. In the cusp, a 10-unit building, there was an $800,000 forgivable loan given to them from CMHC. There's also options for repayable loans if desired. Just to talk about the schedule for this application moving forward, so the basic site due diligence is being conducted in September now. Conceptual design development in October. Preliminary design and application update to council at the October 26, 2020 council meeting. So at that point, we'll bring the preliminary design. Any cost estimates that had been done at that point would be brought to council and an update on the application process. The cost estimate, capital, and operating budgets, as I mentioned, would be in October. The application to the CMHC seed funding, so for the design work that we've talked about in the past, that would be done in October. RFP documentation in November. And council approval, I believe it's the December 14th council meeting, is when the final approval would come to council. And also the Housing Society, so I'll talk about that in a second, and then lastly, the submission to BC Housing is in January. Some other comments, just some clarity on the project in the application. It's actually the Housing Society that will apply for this. The town will be a project partner and provide a letter of support, but it is the Housing Society that applies to BC Housing because they're the ones that would be getting the grants, the loans. It all flows through the Housing Society. So I just wanted to clear that up. And the development consultant will facilitate that work with the above parties, but it is the Housing Society that is the one. So it's important that we work well together with them. And that's my update for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Houle. Very thorough update. I really appreciate it. And it seems like you have quite an ambitious schedule ahead of you, so lots of work left to do. Any questions or comments? Councillor Ventimilla?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. So the Housing Society, thank you. I thought it was close enough. The Housing Society, is there a reason that, I'm assuming we're talking about the Housing Society that Councillor Grice was a part of forming? Is that the society you're talking about? Who are you talking about? Who's the Housing Society?
Like Macola.
Yeah, at this point, I don't think I want to say the name until we have more formal discussions with them, but it is a local housing society that we have approached and have been working with.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. Thank you for that clarification. And then could you just go over again, I know this was in the original report and it wasn't today, but could you go over again the mix of affordable housing that would potentially be?
Are you speaking the 50, 30,
Yeah.
20 split? Yeah, so 50% is 30% is affordable housing, so moderate income. 50% is rent geared to income, which there's a housing income limit, and 20% is deep subsidy.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Do we need a motion to receive the report, or is this just for information? Just for information. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Holm. Moving on to item E5, Pictograph vandalism discussion, and I'll turn it over to Mayor Johansen.
Thank you. I'm sure everybody remembers the recent racist vandalism that happened on OIB lands with the pictographs there. And we did put out something on our Facebook page, denouncing the racism and standing with OIB, and also some formal communication was sent to the OIB as well. And I also did have a conversation with Chief Louie about it. The challenge I had in writing and trying to draft some communication was just how far to go with that communication, because I have noticed in other municipalities and organizations that have used local incidents of racism, a couple sentences in the communication, and then they use it as a platform to speak out about racist incidents elsewhere in Canada, in the U.S., and show support for anti-racist movements taking place elsewhere in North America. We haven't had any conversation around this at the council table, and I didn't want to communicate anything speaking for council on such an important issue that I think we need to have a conversation around. And so I didn't extend past the incident itself, and the question I have for council is, would you like any further communication about racism to include comments denouncing racism in society and or support for anti-racist movements taking place in the world? Is council wanting to have a conversation about racism in general and come out with a statement on that, or are we okay with sticking to the incident at hand and keeping our communication limited to that?
Thank you, Mayor Johansen. Councillor Mattis?
For myself, I would think sticking to the issue at hand is more important, and I know others may feel differently. To me, it's what is the role of council? What is the role of council in our community? Do we speak to national issues? Do we speak to provincial issues? Or do we speak to local issues? I believe we speak to local issues.
Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I somewhat agree with Councillor Mattis on that. I think we should stick to our local issue on this case. I think maybe if there was more of this type of thing happening in the community, then I think perhaps my thoughts would change on this. But as it is, thankfully, so far, a single episode, I think what you're talking about doing and just making the response to the issue that happened would be sufficient.
Councillor Ventimiglia?
I think that's a really great question. I think that I'd have to think about it some more. The way that you and the staff handled the incident last week on OIB lands, I think was really well done. I think it was a local issue that really hurt our neighbors, and I get emotional talking about it like I usually do. But I think that it was important to acknowledge that in the way that we did, and I think it was important to just kind of go through that as a community. Not that it's over by any stretch of the imagination. I think I would need to think more about, hopefully there are no future public incidents like that. But I think racism is alive and kicking in our communities, and that is something totally to think about.
Yeah, I'll add my comment as well. I mean, you know, there are obviously national issues of racism. This certainly was a local issue. And I think for anyone that experiences racism would say that it wasn't isolated, and that, you know, there's, especially towards our Indigenous neighbors, there is quite a bit of racism that's still, you know, systemic and, like Councillor Ventimiglia said, alive and kicking. So I think that perhaps, you know, maybe we could see if there's an appetite for a committee to be formed or something like that with members of the community to facilitate some conversations about racism, an opportunity for some education about, you know, our colonialist history. And, you know, I think through awful incidents like this, there is an opportunity to try to improve the situation for the rest of the community.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting to come to a decision today. It is a topic that needs some thought, and it sounds like it may be a good idea if we were to put it on the agenda of a future committee of the whole meeting, give ourselves some time just to process it and think about it, and then come back and decide if we need to do anything further, if there's an appetite to do anything further, or stick to the incident at hand. This one is the ones that I was looking at where communities went further with their statements, involved incidents directly in their community as opposed to a neighboring community. That doesn't make it any less important, but it is a slight tweak in thinking and response associated. So maybe we could do that. We could just bring it back to a committee of the whole meeting, have a chance to digest it and think about it, because we haven't talked about it, and I definitely didn't want to go further than the incident without councils on something like that. I think any council needs to speak as one voice.
Any further comments? Okay, thank you, Mayor Johansen. Moving on to item E6, outdoor burning discussion. So this was something that I brought forward and unfortunately has landed at the committee of the whole meeting on the smokiest day of the year. Not great timing. It was just a discussion if we want to look at the bylaw. I did ask our fire chief for his opinion on having backyard fires and forwarded that to the rest of council, which is here now. I won't read the whole thing, but just for anyone that's listening, the fire chief basically said that he did not have an objection under certain circumstances. It couldn't be yard waste or bonfires. Enclosed fire devices like a chimenea or something else that was enclosed would be okay. Fire tables with a screen, something to reduce sparks. His concerns were the increase of calls, concern of people burning things that shouldn't be burned, people using a burn barrel to burn garbage, those sorts of things. So I think safety would be a huge consideration. Obviously, we wouldn't want to be allowing fires when there's a fire ban or anything like that, but was interested to hear what the rest of council had to say about that. Councillor Ventimiglia?
Well, we had a fairly lively discussion about outdoor fire pits a couple of years back when it came to council about, it was concerns from neighbors about the fire pits at the campground. And when I was reading through the actual, our report, and I think it's the bylaw in here, number 15, I was just interested to know, because when I read it differently this time than I read it last time, and so burning without a permit, 15AI on page 9, the operation of a permanent outdoor fireplace equipped with a spark arrestor and approved by the fire chief is permitted. So is that not what the fire chief was speaking to?
I had spoken to him about that specifically because I saw that as well, and his comment was basically that he wouldn't approve one, not with the bylaw being the way that it was. Because it did seem, yeah, that's what it seemed like to me, that on a one-off, you could get something approved, but,
I feel like that's exactly what it says.
yeah.
Because it doesn't say what you can burn or anything like that. It's just a permanent outdoor fireplace, which you could read chimenea, you could read any of those sort of more permanent fixtures.
Yeah. Councillor Mattis.
I think chimenea would not be a permanent outdoor fireplace. A permanent outdoor fireplace is exactly that. It's brick, it's built, it's attached to the ground relatively firmly. It's not a where you can pick it up and go here and there. So in terms of that, I felt that the bylaw was fairly clear and gave people the opportunity that if they built it according to the specs of the fire chief, that it would be permitted. To hear that he would not approve any is quite surprising, because if it is built properly, there's no reason that you couldn't have an outdoor fireplace, so to speak, in my mind, and I thought that the bylaw spoke to that. I think the purpose of the bylaw was to prevent particulate going into the air. So it was more about the wood burning than anything else. The one thing that the bylaw does not speak to, and I was trying to, in my mind, get clarification, because we now have a lot of propane-powered fire pits and propane-powered glass top tables with the glass in there, that sort of a thing. And I think that it should be sent back, or staff should be instructed to add something in there to allow those types of devices, because they work as very good substitutes for exactly what we're talking about without burning wood. And that's where they don't put particulate into the air like burning wood puts particulate into the air. And that's really the issue that was the case when we were talking about fire bans and not having open burning. It's about the smoke, the particulate that's in the air. So I think we should revisit that portion of the bylaw to allow for propane-powered burning devices, whether they're freestanding or built in. At this point, when I read this, I'm not sure if a barbecue is allowed. It refers to barbecues with briquettes, but it doesn't refer to a gas barbecue. And so I think there's some clarity required there. So I would pass that back to staff for more for some changes and a review of that. But in terms of the rest of it, I'm fine with it the way that it is. It had to do with particulate.
Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fine with it the way it sits as well, and I don't think it needs to be changed at all. Decorative fires, propane or natural gas, you're not burning anything. It's just flames that are not they're not burning anything but gas. So I'm fine with it the way it sits, and I've had a propane powered fire pit for a long time and never had a problem. And as Councillor Mattis says, the problem is particulate going into the air, which there is none of when you have a propane or natural gas fire pit or fire table. So, and there's lots of people in town who have those, and I don't believe there's ever been any complaints. So I'm fine with it the way it sits. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Mattis.
I agree with Councillor Schwarzenberger, but I think it's important when you read the 15A that no person shall light, ignite, start, or allow or cause to be lighted, ignited, or started an outdoor fire of any kind. Okay, and that's where I'm asking for the clarity around a barbecue or a propane fire pit, that sort of a thing, because at this point it says of any kind.
Councillor Benjamin.
Well, and so then I would add to that, because I read 15A1 differently than was read by my neighbor. And so if we have written in our bylaw that the operation of a permanent outdoor fireplace equipped with a spark arrestor and approved by the fire chief is permitted, but we have word that the fire chief isn't going to permit one, like there needs to be some clarification there as well, I think.
Yeah. And that'd probably be better heard straight from the fire chief.
Totally, absolutely.
Conversation that we had. To staff as well, if we are coming back with more information, I'd be interested to know what neighboring communities are allowing, if any, allowing backyard fires. Mayor Johansen?
When I lived in West Kelowna, we were allowed to have an outdoor fire, but you had to have a source of water, like a garden hose with a nozzle on it, ready to go if something happened. Fire department still showed up the odd time and would make sure that you had all those pieces of the puzzle together. It didn't have to be anything more than sort of some rocks and wood in the center. So my only caution would be is whatever if we're going to allow a wood burning fire, we probably need to have some specifics about it. Just like we heard with the bylaw, it's a lot easier if it's pretty clear what you're allowed or what you're not allowed. If you're trying to describe an enclosed compartment with a spark arrestor, who's going to determine whether that's adequate or not adequate? I don't know. I think most people are probably burning propane these days, and very few people are lighting wood fires. So whatever we do, I think it needs to be laid out very, very clearly here. It seems that everybody, if I'm hearing this right, is interpreting that this already allows a wood burning fire if it's got an arrestor. Is that the interpretation, or am I?
If it's approved by the fire chief.
If it's approved by the fire chief. So maybe there's a process beforehand that you get sort of the stamp of approval if you're interested in having a wood burning fire outside. But anyway, in West Kelowna, we were allowed to have a fire as long as it wasn't, there was no fire ban in the Kamloops Forest District, which we're part of.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I think it's fine, and I think if the fire chief, we could ask the fire chief to come out and say that propane barbecues, fire tables, and fire pits, or propane and natural gas are permitted, then he's, as the wording in the current bylaw, he is approving those, and everything else is subject to the bylaw as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Mattis?
Again, those aren't, the only ones he approves are the permanently affixed ones, not the portable type. And that's why I think we need clarification within the bylaw, is that he approves fireplaces, permanent fireplaces. He doesn't approve temporary ones. And that's why we need some clarification about what's allowed, what isn't allowed. So at this point, I would make the motion that staff be directed to review the fire bylaw, whatever it was here. I don't have it in front of me.
1369.
1369, specifically Section 15, outdoor burning, and provide better clarification for council and the public.
Motion on the table. Do you have a second? Mayor Johansen?
I would second that. I think it would be a very easy line to add in there, maybe looking for some kind of CGA certification on whatever, so that somebody hasn't, sort of invented or made up their own type of device. But if you've got a certified appliance, that should be allowed. And it doesn't say that here. You can interpret that, but bylaws are always better when they are just clear.
And that's where I think having the fire chief come in to speak might be helpful if we do want to expand it at all beyond a permanently affixed fireplace into, say, something like a chimney or something like that. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And it's carried.
Councillor Schwarzenberger was opposed.
Moving on to item E7, year-round housing, notice of motion, and that's me again. So I had originally written this just prior to the COVID shutdown, and then it didn't seem like it was an appropriate time to bring it back. The reason I brought it back now is I took part in a discussion that we had with the committee about our cold weather shelters, and the grant program has changed. Initially, it was more, if the weather drops below a certain temperature, they open up the community center with beds and that sort of thing, and it would be sort of a one night or however long the temperature dropped. Well, now the funding has changed so that it would be a temporary but permanent housing from the months of November to March. So that's why I brought this back, because I thought, well, if we're going to do this and house people from November to March, then perhaps we should go further and look at something that has the supports that will get people, up and on their own. I brought an example of, which I know you can't see, but I'll talk a little bit about it, that I saw when I was at UBCM last year. It was a temporary supportive modular housing site. It was a three-story building that housed 46 units for people experiencing homelessness or were at risk of homelessness. It was staffed 24/7, provided life-enhancing services such as meal programs, life skills training, employment preparation, health and social services, et cetera, et cetera. So from what they were talking about, it was sort of built similarly to our hotel. It was brought in units, sort of all put together on a site. It was a 3-year program, so the residents would stay there for 3 years, and then the idea was, through those 3 years, they'd get the supports that they needed so that they could move on to something that required less support, and then the program would move on to a different community, was how I understood it. So I thought that would be worth a conversation for us to have today. I did also talk to Marie Zatar, the Executive Director for Desert Sun Counseling Center. Her comment was that we are in desperate need of a shelter in Oliver. And I'll open it up to any questions or comments. Councillor Mattis?
I have no issues with any of it. I think the last sentence of it should be a little more specific, if that's what you're referring to, though. And I only say that because the way I read it, it's like a global statement, the way that it reads. If you want it specific to homelessness, then it should say that.
I imagined that the resolution would probably need a bit of a tweaking, but yeah, the idea would be for supportive housing through BC Housing. Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I don't have any problem with supportive housing or looking at supportive housing. I think supportive housing, from my understanding, and I think we need a lot more information, but from my understanding, supportive housing talks to having lots of support, and I'm not sure we have some of those supports in our community, like mental health and outreach and substance abuse and all those kind of things that supportive housing are, and it's an integral part of supportive housing. So I have no problem in looking at this further. I think at the moment we want to move forward with a cold shelter for this winter, and we have staff looking at affordable housing, and I think we've got staff looking at a lot of things, and I'd hate to throw something else on the plate at this time. I'd like to see the cold shelter get up and running before we look at the next step, which is probably a very viable step. I have lots of questions about it, but in principle, I have no issues with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Just through to the it's me, to the CAO. Just to clarify, the cold weather shelter discussion that was for 2021, is that correct? Oh, she's not there. Okay, thank you. So I think if that were the case, I mean, there's probably time to look at both options, or at least see what kind of funding is out there, if there's something that we can do that's more permanent. Councillor Ventimilla, and then...
So just a question of process, because we don't deal with notice of motions very often. If we pass this notice of motion today, it's a notice that this motion is going to come back, and it will come back, I assume, with a report attached, at which point in time we will have the conversation about whether or not we want to pass the motion in question. Is that correct?
That is correct. It will appear on the minutes as a notice of motion, and then it's brought to the next meeting to further discussion.
where we have the debate with a report attached and then make a decision. Okay. So, I mean, if that's the case, then I support the notice of motion because I look forward to having the conversation. I think I have lots of questions and not a lot of answers. I think shelter is different than supportive housing, and as mentioned by Councillor Schwarzenberger, like my initial thought is supportive housing requires a lot of supports that we as a small municipality perhaps don't have to offer, but I don't actually know that, and so I would look forward to having that information when we actually have the conversation.
Mayor Johansen?
Yes, I do support the motion in principle, and one thing that I would want more information on is that I believe there is a willingness to make a land contribution. I know that staff have been working on a document that identifies all the land that the town owns and where it is, and I think identifying a piece of land before having discussions would be a good step to have, so that we know that we actually have a piece of land that we're willing to put forward for that. Where it is and how big it is going to be important. I don't think that is complete at this point in time, and until we have a piece of land, that would be a question for down the road. Where is that piece of land? Thank you.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
No, I'm good. I had a similar question.
And I think that the initial discussion with the Cold Weather Shelter Committee probably identified some of the players that would be involved if we were to go this route instead, where there was some discussions of land and supports and those sorts of things. Okay, so this doesn't work the way I thought it did. So what's the process from here then?
Council would just receive the motion, the notice of motion, and it'll appear in the minutes for this meeting as a notice of motion, and then staff would bring in a staff report to be able to answer some of the questions that council has.
Thank you, Corporate Officer. Are there any other questions or comments? Can I get a motion to receive the motion? Councillor Ventimiglia? Councillor Schwarzenberger? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to public question period. I don't see anybody. Then I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Schwarzenberger, Councillor.
Somebody crack a joke, hurry up, it's too quiet here.
Yeah. Come on. Don't know any
Come on, Steve, you don't need all these jokes?
Can I remind?
When you get our attention, tell us that that's the wrong number, we're talking 14.
There you go.
That will get our attention.
Yeah. We're actually going to change our recommendation.
Yeah.
It's a golf rating. that
Yeah,
guys
add another zero. Another 9 million.
I see 7 p.m.
Oh, there we are.
I call this regular meeting of council, Town of Oliver, September 8th, 2020. Call this meeting to order. Are there any late items to add to the agenda?
No, there are not, Your Worship.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated? Councillor Ventimiglia, Councillor Grice, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
May I please remind everyone to speak into their mics, please? Thank you.
Okay. Adoption of prior minutes, adoption of August 24th, 2020, regular open council meeting minutes. The motion is the minutes of August 24th, 2020, regular open minutes be adopted as circulated.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Second.
Seconded. Call a question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Committee reports. Chairperson Grice, have you got a report from the committee of the whole meeting this evening?
Thank you, Worship. We had a discussion with the about the heritage designation bylaw by Sue Morhun of the Oliver and District Heritage Society. She had clarified the difference between the heritage registry and the heritage designation bylaw, talked about its importance, benefits to private property owners, property values, etc. So that report was received for information. We reviewed the 2021 council appointments. There were a few that were shuffled around, but for the most part, they stayed the same. So there was a motion passed that council direct staff, that we made those changes to the appointments. We had a Bylaw Enforcement Services update. There was a discussion of issues, challenges, successes, and future projects. We were happy to hear from Ms. Dolbeck that there's been a good relationship struck with the RCMP. There were some concerns discussed about uniforms, so we'll be looking at that at a future date. And that report was received for information. We had a housing grant update from the Director of Development Services, so there's been lots of progress made. There's some info about a new CMHC forgivable loan. Our next update will be in October. It's a very ambitious schedule, lots to do, but it sounds like it's all going quite well and under control, so that was good. We had a discussion led by Mayor Johansen about the recent active racist vandalism on the Pictograph on OIB property. So this will be further discussed at a future committee of the whole meeting. We did have an update from the mayor on our response to the OIB. They had a good conversation, the mayor and Chief Louis, and council also made a statement on social media in regards to that unfortunate act. We had a discussion about outdoor burning. Whether we should revisit allowing backyard fires. It was sent back to staff for clarification of specifics in the bylaw of what is currently allowed. And then there was a notice of motion that was received to be looked at a future meeting in regards to year-round social housing. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you, Chairperson Grice. Moving to item 2, adoption of August 24th, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to adopt those minutes, please?
So moved.
So moved. Second. Second, Councillor Grice. Any further discussion? Call a question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to water matters. Gallagher Lake Siphon, update and award of contract. I'll ask the Director of Operations to come up. We also have True Engineering here as well.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. So my report is to award the Gallagher Lake Siphon Project contract, and True's here to discuss some updates and maybe some of the processes and any questions that Council may have about the project, because it's a significant cost to the town. And it's one of our largest projects that we've done. So I'll just touch on a couple things, and then I'll ask Natalie and Steve, who've worked quite extensively on this project for a long time now, mostly Natalie, I think. So she's put a lot of time into this project, and we're close to being shovel ready, and it's kind of exciting that we're finally here. It's been years that we've been working on this, and so just to give council a little bit of an update, in the magnitude of this project's a little larger, so to feel comfortable about awarding a contract to a capable contractor, we put out a request for qualifications back in June, and it went to early July, and we received 13 qualified bids that we went through, and we ranked and went through all the proposals, and then we brought brought that number down to 4. And those 4 were then qualified to put in their bids and proposals to get the project. And you know what? I think I'll probably put it over to Steve and Natalie, and they can discuss it more, and then we can we'll see what council wants to do on awarding the contract.
Yeah, you're right. This has been Natalie's probably primary project for 4 years, and it's a big one for one of her jobs early in her career. She's been keeping me going in a straight line with keeping everything and all the OIB and all the communication side really dialed in, and she's been doing a great job so far, and hopefully we'll get through to the end. Can I click the slides, or do you have to?
You should be able to.
Okay. And so is this on your screens, or do you guys have to, you have to see it? Okay. So we put together a bit of an update. As you recall, the last time we were in front of you, we were with Beagle Spillin and Associates, and we were presenting 2 options. One was the gravity option with a price, and the other one was the low head siphon option, and we had done the business analysis and chosen this option to proceed with, and it had a $13 million cost estimate associated with it, which made it into the budget. And so we've been proceeding per the recommendations of those reports in doing the NRFP, and we added an RFQ stage to the process. One place where we did vary is that one of the recommendations was to have the town pre-purchase all the pipe for the project. We, in the end, decided not to do that. There was the 2 reasons mainly is that one of the reasons for that was risk of supply for timing, and we determined that the pipe that we thought we were going to use, which was the PVC pipe, was actually in stock in Edmonton, so the risk of supply was not as risky, and there was at least 2 other material that could be used on this project that we wanted to expose the project to in the marketplace. So if we pre-purchased the pipe, that meant we were using PVC. If we left the pipe to be the supply of the contractor, that meant that the other 2 materials could potentially come into play, and it made the other suppliers probably sharpen their pencils as they move forward. So that's the major change that we did from the original recommendations. So after we did the RFQ stage, which John described, we then shortlisted to 4 and had them submit proposals. We then did a similar evaluation against criteria sheet of those proposals and gave everyone a score. The proposals were heavily weighted to price. So of this total score, 65 points was related to price. So H&M would have got 65 out of 65 for that number, and everyone else would have got a slightly different number. You can see that our number 2 recommended contractor there had a score of 81, but actually the 3rd highest price. So it did show that our evaluation did make it possible to change rankings based on what you wrote in your proposal and the quality of your proposal. But what we did notice about our criteria is that if 2 people did a really good job on a proposal, there was no way that it was going to flip because unless of price, because it was such heavily weighted towards price. You see H&M's total score there is 91, which made them the preferred proponent. And we have begun negotiations with them to finalize some finer points of their proposal. We're here today asking you to award the contract to them based on their bid of $9.3 million, but we will be accepting some recommendations that they made to reduce costs, and we plan on just change ordering those so that we have a fixed contractor now, and then as we make minor changes to material specifications for things such as hatch covers and stuff like that. They're pretty minor, but there is some savings. We will continue to make those and issue change orders to this number to bring it down. If there was something that we discovered that we wanted to increase it, I guess in theory we could change order it up, but we haven't seen anything in our negotiations that's going to increase this price. It's mainly ideas to decrease it. From a permitting perspective, there's numerous permits required to construct this project. We've submitted and received several of them. You can see the top two are received, and that is how we've been able to commence with some of the clearing activities that you've seen out there. We've been clearing antelope brush and trees. There is some risk on item 3 there, the Water Sustainability Act Section 11 permit. It's not in place, and all 4 of our proponents wanted to commence construction of the pump station this year. Recognizing that they couldn't finish it in one season like we were hoping and like we were planning, that it could all be built in one season. So we are going to be doing temporary, we're going to start construction of the pump station this year and do temporary ties to the canal in the spring and actually flow water through a shell of this pump station this year and next summer, and then finish it in the following winter. H&M's proposal was also based on them being able to do the work under Vassaw Creek at the same time as they're doing the pump station. If we don't deliver the Section 11 permit in time for them to do that work, there will have to be a slight cost risk where we have to delay them, and they'll have to do that work the following year. There's no risk to the pump station because the pump station is outside of the Vassaw Creek wetland, that is covered by a Section 11 permit. The rest of our permits are much lower risk. There's no risk, or there's low risk that we're not going to get a Section 11 permit. Everything is submitted, and we have a complete submission. We're just trying to actively be a squeaky wheel to try and get that approval in time. We have received our archaeological heritage permit, so we can proceed with all the archaeological work in conjunction with this project. The 28-2 permit is the form of tenure that we have over the OIB lands. That has actually been submitted by the OIB to the federal government, so there's no or low risk that the OIB has any problems. It's in the federal process right now. The OIB Lands Department has said that if we need to get work started and the 28-2 hasn't shown up, they will issue us a permit, like a written letter to allow us to proceed with work, but we do want the formal approval in place. And our side is, there's a land acquisition cost in our budgets, and our stance is that we're not going to be paying the land acquisition monies until the 28-2 permit's in hand. Utility permits with Fortis, we are laying the pipe close to their high-pressure gas line, in which case we do need a permit, but we're not in there right away by any means. We're just near it, so it's just a standard permit. And the MOTI permit to construct, again, we've been meeting with MOTI throughout the project. We're not expecting any delays. Our recent communications with them is within the next few weeks we should have those permits. So from an approval and permitting perspective, we feel we're quite safe. We still just have the Water Sustainability Act permit that we submitted back in August, and even when we submitted it, we thought it was for work a whole year from now. We didn't realize it was going to be for work in 3 months. So we've been becoming more squeaky with that one, and we're confident that we can meet with the people and impress upon them the requirement to get this thing issued in a timely manner. The land tenure, again with that MOTI permit, when they issue us that permit, they'll also be approving the design of the road across, I guess, the property adjacent to the trailer park. And when they sign off on that land, I guess, acquisition, then we'll be able to proceed with finalizing the dedication of that as a road to construct our pipe in. And the 28-2 is for the land on the top panel there that I spoke to earlier that is actually submitted already. We took the low bid or the preferred bid, and we tried to do a comparison to the original budget that was presented to you when we chose this option. So the Class B estimate was 11.4 when we presented this to you, and we chose this option. And in that budget, the original budget, you can see there was an engineering contingency, and that was a recommendation of the Spiegelspillen or consultant. And that, if you remember, that was for the known unknowns. Those were for the things that we were going to come up with during detailed design that were going to be added to the project. We've finished detailed design, and we did add some things to the project. The project ended up, the pump station ended up needing a bit more concrete than we had originally estimated. Just once structural got a hold of it, and the size of the structure, it had a little bit more concrete. We added a drain that wasn't necessarily imagined in the original budget, and an overflow. We always knew we'd need an overflow, but the way it ended up becoming, the overflow is actually going to be located at the inlet structure, which wasn't quite what we had thought we were going to build, but it got added to the scope, and those were kind of the known unknowns now. They're in the bid, so the 8.291 million includes all those things that we added, but we're not anticipating anything more to be added. The design's done. The drawings are done. It's been tendered, and so we're okay eliminating the engineering contingency, and then we've updated some of the other costs. The environmental work is looking like it's going to be costing a little bit more than we had anticipated. The antelope brush removal, there's snake fencing that we didn't realize we were going to have to do until we got our SARA permit. So there's some things that have been added to that budget. Archaeological is looking like it's going to be slightly more expensive than we budgeted, and you can see we're carrying a number $15,000 higher. The construction contingency is a safe number up there that says 500,000. That was which was in our NRFP bid documents. We asked everyone to bid with a $500,000 contingency in their price. When I look at what could happen, I don't imagine us eating into that very heavily at all. I mentioned the risk of us not achieving a permit. There'll be a slight cost factor there if we don't get it, but it's not nearly a $500,000 cost factor. It would probably be a $40,000 or $80,000 cost factor if we missed that permit. But we do carry a contingency for as it was presented by Spiegelspillen, was the unknown unknowns. We just don't know what we're going to dig up, and so we have a $500,000 contingency, but we also have a $290,000 archaeological contingency, and that's again for an unknown unknown that we might dig up from an archaeological perspective. I think we're more than safe with those two contingencies being loaded on. Land tenure hasn't changed in cost. Engineering, we've carried the same number of costs as a simple percentage of total cost. There has been mention from town staff that the town may consider hiring a project manager, and that's not really up to us to advise. Either way, we'll be part of the conversation, but if there was a manager hired, the fees would come out of that engineering budget, which is a budget. So the three pipe materials that ended up being our project was exposed to in the market were HDPE, which is a fused black product that you may have seen. It has no joints. It ends up being just a continuous pipe end to end. Ductile iron was also carried in some people's bids. The advantage to ductile iron was that it could be buried shallower and required less excavation. And then PVC, which when we had done the original evaluation, we thought would be the preferred product. It had a 100-year life. or 80-year design life like the HDP, and it seemed to be the right price. HDP was a challenging material to use in that it increased the impact to the frontage road. To install HDP, you have to fuse it all up on land, and then you dig up one really long ditch and you move this pipe like a snake into the ditch. You do very few joint connections in the trench, and so the impact to all those businesses along the frontage road was going to be significant if we went to HDPE. But the sections kind of through the two right-of-ways on the OIB land and coming down from the canal were better candidates for HDPE, but in the end, there wasn't a price advantage to be using it, even though our indications were that it had a cheaper unit cost to supply. But by the time you brought a machine out to fuse it together, and then did the excavation and tried to deal with accesses to the businesses, it didn't seem to be a better value to the overall project. So the final bid, the H&M price that we're bringing here to recommend award to includes PVC, which will mean it goes in 6-meter lengths, and we can keep the construction zone smaller to keep access to those businesses along the frontage road as we proceed through. There's the question mark there.
Councillor
Michelle.
I guess best case scenario, we wouldn't tap into the construction and the archaeology contingencies.
Best case scenario.
$700,000.
Best case scenario, we would bring those in at zeros.
Yep. The rest is basically there.
Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Your Worship. Is there any influence that we can bring to bear through our MLA with whatever ministry we're waiting on for that one crossing permit?
I can't say we need it yet, but that might be something that we can. We were having troubles with the archaeological permit, and sometimes it was just asking for someone that we could have the mayor phone. It was enough to get everything loosened up, and so we will ask that question if it's coming to a risk for sure. We'll make sure that we utilize anything that we have to do to try and get it. But we're not at that stage yet. It's been submitted in mid-August. They're having staffing issues, but once they assign a case person to it, we'll go meet them and impress upon them our timeline issues and our unforeseen timeline issues. But it's a good problem because everything appears to be on budget, and we really want to execute in the shortened timeline, which is still a 2-year timeline, all like you guys have seen all along. Like, we'll start this year and we won't finish until we'll need 2 winters to build it, and it'll be the next spring.
Just as a follow-up to Councillor Mattis' question, when you said you were hoping to have that permit in November, December, what's the date that it's too late?
Yeah, we asked that question to H&M last week. We said, what's our drop dead date? Because what we're doing to be proactive is we're going to design the temporary tie to the old canal, assuming it doesn't happen. We're going to sketch that for H&M, and they're going to put a price to it. So before we actually execute the contract with them, we'll know what the risk cost will be to failure. And they indicated it was probably close to December 1st would be their drop dead date. They're going to order the pipe anyway, and we've agreed that the town will pay for the pipe when it arrives. So there's no cost risk on financing pipe that can't be put in until the next year. But there isn't a schedule risk. It can all go in the next year. It just was in their base bid. They assumed they could do it all this year.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Worship. Just for the people at home and me, the difference of 9.2 million to the 11 million, is that because we're buying the pipe? I don't understand.
Between those two prices?
Yeah.
No, that's 2 different contractors pricing it 2 different ways. You'll see that we shortlisted to 4 contractors that we determined were fully capable of building this project. One of them is local, and that was H&M. The other one, the number 2 ranked, was Emil Anderson. They bid that out of their Kelowna office. IDL was from Prince George, but these are big contractors that we're talking about.
I think what Councillor Schwarzenberg is referring to is the 9 million of the bid price.
And the
then
11 million on the
total
project
price.
cost.
And I think that the bid price doesn't include all of the archaeology.
So you mean you're going to the, I'll go back to the budget.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
So the 9 million that we've asked you to award to
First line.
is this 8.29 plus contingency plus GST. GST is a flow-through cost, so we don't account it as a cost, but when we actually award a contract, it includes GST.
So that 500,000 contingency is in that 9 million? So
Yeah.
it's the 8.2 plus the 500,000 plus GST?
Yeah, so you take 9 million and you subtract GST, and then you subtract 500,000 and you get 8.291.
Okay.
And we get the GST back.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, yes, you get 100% of the GST back.
Yeah. I just wasn't sure which, the 8.2 plus what other pieces added up to 9.
Yeah, sorry, it's just the 5 and the 500
Yeah.
there, and then GST.
Okay, thank you.
And I actually did phone your CFO to confirm that it's 100% of the GST back, because we always assume it's that, but if it was a small fraction of the GST, it might add up in 10 million. So, yeah, he confirmed that it was 100% of the GST you get back.
Excellent.
Councillor Michelle?
Just curious, of that 8.2, how much is pipe? What's the pipe cost?
Do you have that answer, Natalie? Like the supply cost or the
Yeah,
pipe?
the supply. How much is the pipe cost?
That's from IPEX.
Yeah, it's 1.9 for the PVC, and then 310 for the concrete going under Vaso.
About 2.3 million.
Could I ask that you provide those over the mic?
Oh, it was 1.9 for the PVC, is that correct?
Yep.
And 300,000 for the concrete that goes under vessel.
Just curious.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you. You also mentioned the steel pipe had a lower cost because you didn't have to dig it down so deep. Does it have less of a lifespan?
Yeah, so the steel pipe, ductile iron pipe, which the material supply cost ended up having $1 million higher material supply cost, but the question, and our contractors evaluated it, was if you have to dig less deep and therefore have less excavation and bedding to take advantage of the much lower cover, could it still be a cheaper alternative? And it turned out it wasn't, but it was worth evaluating.
Certainly.
Councillor Mattis?
On that basis, I would make the motion that council award the Gallagher Lake Siphon Project to H&M Excavating Limited for $9,231,423.92, inclusive of GST and contingency.
Seconded. Councillor Michelle? Any further discussion? Questions, Council?
Let's get her going.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Let's dig a hole. Let's dig a hole.
Let's dig a hole, put some pipe, lay some pipe.
Moving to item 2, 2020 irrigation turnoff and canal shutdown dates. Director of Operations.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's that time of the year again where we have to determine our shutdown dates and canal diversion shutdown. So this is the first time I've actually proposed 2 different dates. I've proposed the irrigation turnoff for Tuesday, October 6th, 2020, and the canal cease diversion on Tuesday, October 27th, And then after talking to my staff and my main operators, rural operators, I said, do we have some flexibility there, just in case seems to be warmer. It's going to be warmer in September and maybe into October, we don't know. And, there's a possibility people may need a little more water before they fully shut down. So we proposed October 13th for the irrigation turnoff and cease diversion a couple days later on the 29th. We can't really go past that. Otherwise, we have people working into the weekend, which is still doable. And from what Steve has told me, and we were just discussing the Gallagher Lake project, that they're actually breaking ground on November 1st. So we want everything out of there and cleared away, and they can get going. So, yeah, the only difference is, if you look at the history, really going back to the history, I always like to put this table down to show you some of the history, the start dates and shutdown dates, and the 6th is a little bit earlier than most years, so that's why we've proposed the 13th, which is after the Thanksgiving long weekend. And then the 29th is just an alternative to shut down a couple days later, because our low pressure users and people that want late irrigation, generally the grape growers at that time of the year, they'll take the water as long as possibly can. So that's just giving a couple extra days. And then when I talk to my staff, we would shut down the canal and do some winterizing. And if the weather was favorable, we'd just leave it for Monday, come back and do the rest of the winterizing in the pump houses. But last year we did run into some cold weather right at the end of October. We actually had a spray filler freeze on us, and there was some minor damages in certain areas. So that's something to keep in mind. And I've also included the number of late irrigation applications, just to give council an idea of how many requests for late water there are. And it's hit and miss, and depends usually when the shutdown dates are. If it's a little later, you'll get less requests, and if it's a little earlier, you'll generally get more, in the 30 range. And if there are any questions?
Councillor Michelle?
I'm comfortable with October 6th, Sean, but I think what you mentioned earlier, that we almost have to remain flexible, because every year it's going to be different. Last year it got rainy in September, so we could shut it off at 20th of September and it would have been fine. But if we get a real Indian summer going all the way into the end of September, it'd be nice to have that option for council maybe too, when we get together in the next meeting, and just say, maybe we should leave it for the 13th. What does that do to you and scheduling and all that?
It doesn't really affect us too much. There's some people are already phoning us in early October to shut them off so they can blow out their systems, and a lot of the orchards will shut down a little earlier, but we're flexible this year on this. If we could go with the proposed dates that that staff recommended, the 6th and the 27th. And like you were saying, Councillor Michelle, if the weather, depending on the weather, and we can always change that in October or late September.
That's what I wanted to know. I think we should set it today at the 6th, but I don't think that that's like a cut and dry decision. If all of a sudden, like I say, we've got an Indian summer going on to the end of September where it's still 25, 28, then we could, You're telling me that we could change our minds and leave it.
Yeah, you just don't want to leave it too close to those dates, though, because we have to put we'll do some advertising, but and we start taking late irrigation requests and stuff so if we do decide this, it would have to be late September, and we can get a message out, or PSA out at least, and make those changes and get it out to the public.
That's fine with me. I mean, I can move, I'll move the 6th, and as long as we're flexible and, you know, we've got a super hot Indian summer going, then maybe we can change, you know, leave it for an extra week. So I'd move the 6th.
Have a second? Second. Councillor Stu. Any further discussion? Councillor Mattis?
Your worship, I'm looking at my calendar. We do have another council meeting this month.
That's right.
Yeah, so that would be the opportunity to change it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we could do it at that meeting. I wouldn't go too late after that, though.
That's what-
Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty. I will call the question then. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to item 3, the water quality report for August 2020. Director of Operations.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can just stay up here for... Okay, sorry, I'm just bringing up the report. So this is the water quality summary report for August. It's there's nothing extravagant that's happened in August. Or I know that when I talk to my rural water operators, we were using our max capacity of what we have in our canal for a good portion of August. And just because, and as you can see below, like the temperatures of August were quite warm. It was over seasonal, and very little precipitation, which it was under the norm. So those factor in. But then our overall water usage was still quite reasonable. So I think it's just sometimes our peak demands at certain times really maxes out our canal system, and then hopefully now and 2 years from now we won't have to worry about that. Yeah, our overall domestic groundwater consumption was a little bit down than the 7-year average, and same with our surface water consumption for August. And that was pretty much it, unless you guys had any, if council had any questions.
Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a question. I just think it would be interesting if there was, and I doubt that there's a way that we could ever determine the difference in loss once we bury this, put this pipe in the ground. Like, that's going to be a kilometer of pipe, basically. It'd be interesting to know if we're cutting down on evaporative loss or leakage loss, although I know there's really no way of measuring that.
There'll be some savings that way.
One would think, yeah.
I don't know how much loss we have.
Well, when we're at max capacity in another August like we had this year, then maybe we'll actually have some room in the system because we have less loss.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Michelle?
Actually, it's more of a question through to Drew. Steve, what's our increase in capacity compared to what we've got right now with the fix we're doing? Is it 20%, 10%?
We're running at 70% of capacity right now, of design capacity, with the temporary repair.
So we're going to go to 100%?
We'll be at 100% of design capacity after the project's complete.
Which will be March 2022. Which relieves our staff, let me tell you, because we thought we may have to start doing some rolling shutoffs, or people would have to live with reduced pressure because it was getting close on a lot of days.
So I'll move receipt.
Moved. Second. Councillor Mattis? Further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, 2021 regular open meeting schedule. I will pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Attached is the 2021 regular open meeting schedule for council's consideration. Each year, the town is required under the community charter to publish a list of scheduled regular open meetings for the upcoming year, and it is attached for your consideration, as I said. And I will do a better job, but meetings are to be scheduled the second and fourth Monday of each month. with some meetings are postponed to Tuesday as necessary to accommodate statutory holidays. In previous years, council had accommodated a summer break schedule in August, and it's proposed to cancel the August 9th meeting. This does leave a 3-week break in between meetings. And in previous years, if there was some planning matters or items that required council's attention, we would schedule a special meeting. The 2021 UBCM convention is scheduled for the week of September 13th to the 17th, which necessitates the cancellation of the September 13th meeting. This year, if it goes to COVID, maybe they'll change it to a shorter convention, and we'll uncancel that meeting. The 2021 convention schedule is noted for council's interest as well, and it's noted on the schedule of meetings. On the schedule, I do note now the alternative location of the Frank Venables Theatre. We do have our council chambers, of course, but there could be our location, again, for a longer period. Again, the acting mayor schedule, I made no change to that, but I will take your thoughts if you wish to switch up months to accommodate your own personal and work schedules. So the recommendation before council is that council approve the 2020-21 regular open meeting schedule and proceed with the public notification. Thank you.
Councillor Mattis?
I don't know whether it's ever come up in the past, but with the one canceled for UBCM, is there ever a need, or has there been a volume sufficient of business to have, say, a meeting on the Friday prior to the UBCM or the Monday following?
Since I've been here in 2015, I don't recall a meeting being scheduled to accommodate the cancellation. Not sure if the CAO recalls it.
I know that we have never scheduled one. I'm just wondering, when we take that extra break there, whether we should just move the date of the meeting as opposed to canceling it altogether. Just asking a question.
Through the chair to Councillor Mattis. In the past, we've basically haven't had a need, like the volume of applications that come forward, there has not been a need to have that particular meeting.
Okay.
Any other questions, council? Can I get a mover of the motion to approve the 2021 regular open meeting schedule and proceed with public notification? Councillor Schwarzenberger, second. Second, Councillor Ventimiglia. Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. And moving on to item 5, 2020 Council Policy Review, Water. Pass it over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is before council. These are more water-related policies for council's consideration as a part of the 2020 Council Policy Review. This is the last set of policies relative to water matters that are attached to this report. The policies begin at staff retirement and end with water service extension variance permits. For your interest as well, this is the last set of policies brought to council for review for water matters and general. So we have made it through all of the policies, and we're starting to slowly have some ready to bring back as amended or new policies for your consideration at upcoming meetings. So beginning with staff retirement, that policy was written and adopted by council on November 25th, 1996. Staff's suggestion is to review and bring back to council and to look at a gift staff retirement and staff service recognition policy in combination. As you'll see, I have the staff service recognition below that. That was adopted on April 25th, 1994, and it has the same comment for council's consideration. But I would take any comments on those two policies before we move on to the next one, if you have any.
I don't see any questions.
Thank you. The next policy is the videotaping of regular council meetings. That was written and adopted by council April 10th, 2007. It's to review and bring back an updated webcasting policy, as we have to webcast everything now. And we are getting kudos in the news for our good webcasting experiences for the media and the public. If anybody has any comments on that policy,
Councillor Grice?
Thank you, Your Worship. I mean, I think some things have changed here since this was written. I don't think we're actually on Channel 18 anymore.
No.
In my opinion, I mean, I think space permitting, I have no issue with allowing more than one camera into there. I mean, I think we're trying to be open, so the more the merrier. And I mean, I think a lot more people are probably watching us online than when this was written, so it probably needs a revamp. Sorry, it feels weird not to look at you while I'm talking. That's all for me.
Okay.
Okay.
The next policy is the violence in the workplace. That was written and adopted by council June 26, 1995, and that's to review and bring back to council. We are looking at our respect in the workplace policy currently, and that's ready to come back to council for the next meeting. The Occupational Health and Safety Advisor does note that they should be reviewed concurrently, so that will probably be brought forward to council for consideration and a look. Any comments on that?
Are you going to keep the two policies separate? Or would you roll them into one, like a code of conduct policy, anything like that? And to go further than that, I'm just wondering if that really needs to be a council policy or that's more of an administrative exercise.
Violence in the workplace would probably be more towards our safety program, and it would probably be involved and written with our contractor for our health and safety. So yes, it would probably be an administrative policy over a council policy.
I think we'll be waiting for staff to bring back their comments on each of these policies. They'll be looking at all of them and coming back with recommendations.
Okay.
Thank you for those comments. The next policy that's noted is the water leak adjustment policy. That was written and adopted by council August 9th, 2016. The Chief Financial Officer has provided a comment that given the age of our metering program, he would like to determine the relevance of the policy. I believe that he would probably bring something to council for your consideration to amend or just rescind.
Yeah. That's what I'm assuming is going to happen with all of these policies.
Yes.
Is they'll be brought back to either amend or rescind, and then we'll review them at that time more so than now.
Yep. And then the last policy again is the water service extension variance permits. And again, the recommendation is just to review and bring back to council for comment. That was adopted in 1995. If there's any comments, I can take them.
I don't see any comments. Okay. I'll go into council reports. Anything to report, Councillor Michelle?
Nothing to do with council, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anything, Councillor Sidhu?
On September 3rd, I visited a grower on Fruitvale Way. He's had some questions about moving his fill station from the current property over to the next one because he was trying to expand his parking lot for the winery, and it's kind of just in his way now. I referred him to Joseph at Public Works, and I think they're getting it sorted out. And just tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sidhu. Alrighty. Moving to bylaws. Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1380.15, 380 and 389 Chardonnay Avenue for adoption. Do we have our Director of Development Services here?
No, we do not have our Director of Development Services here, as it's here for adoption. We have received the Ministry of Transportation approval, so there is no further items to be discussed with regards to these rezoning.
Councillor Mattis.
I will move adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw 1380.15 regarding 380 and 389 Chardonnay Avenue.
A second.
Seconded. Any further questions? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to item 2, permissive tax exemption bylaw 1398. I'll refer to our Deputy Finance Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. What Council has in front of them tonight is the permissive tax exemption bylaw for 3 readings. The Community Charter allows municipalities to grant permissive tax exemptions for up to 10 years. However, the Town of Oliver's permissive tax exemption policy has capped it to a maximum of 4 years. Traditionally, past councils have granted a 4-year exemption to applicants. However, in the previous year, council decided to grant applications only a 1-year exemption. The main deciding factor for the 1-year exemption was due to the new applicant, Desert Sun Counseling, and the desire for council to reevaluate their exemption in 2020. Section 224 of the Community Charter allows council on or before October 31st of each year to adopt by simple majority a bylaw to exempt from taxation the land improvements or both owned and used for various specified purposes. The more common uses and the ones for which the Town of Oliver has provided taxation exemption in the past include used or occupied by a place of public worship, used or occupied by a hospital, used or occupied by a home for elderly citizens constructed with the assistance of aid granted by the province after January 1st, 1947 and before March 31st, 1974. This is the section of the Charter that Kiwanis falls under. Used for charitable purposes, owned or held by an athletic or service club, and used for public service purposes. These permissive tax exemptions provided by council are in addition to the statutory exemptions that the land and improvements may be entitled under Section 220 of the Community Charter. These statutory exemptions are primarily used for churches and only includes the lands of the footprint of the building and the land on which the building stands. This means any land surrounding the building or additional buildings are not statutorily exempt and must be exempted through this process as a permissive tax exemption. My report goes into much more detail on the background of these exemptions, but I will now jump into the current year information on the applications we received. We received 30 applications, 10 of which are considered statutorily exempt under Section 220. It has been past practice of council to provide a permissive tax exemption to the remaining lands surrounding these types of properties. These 10 properties include the United Church of Canada, which is 2 properties, the Synod Diocese of Kootenay, Seventh-day Adventist Church, St. Paul's Lutheran Church Society, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Nelson, Pentecostal Assemblies, Covenant Word of Life, Oliver Kiwanis Senior Housing, which is 2 properties. And in addition to that, there are 2 applications that are classified as heritage properties which occupy town property. In the past, council has provided full exemptions for these properties. They include the Oliver Heritage Society Archive Building, land and parking, and again, the Oliver Heritage Society Museum, land and improvements. Applicants are required to demonstrate that they meet council's objectives and may include cultural and recreational opportunities for adults and youth, promotion of the local economy, local charitable services, enhancing quality of life, economic, social, or cultural, and delivering services that are more effective and economical if they were provided by town staff. In addition, within the Town of Oliver's permissive tax exemption policy, the use of land and/or improvements must benefit the community in one of the following ways: provide recreational facilities for public use, provide recreational programs for public, provide programs and/or facilities used by youth, seniors, or other special needs groups, preserve heritage important to the community character, preserve an environmentally, ecologically significant area of the community, offer cultural or educational programs to the public which promote community spirit, cohesiveness, and tolerance, offer services to the public in formal partnership with the municipality. My report goes on to detail all the applications the town received, including the types of services that they are providing and how they meet the criteria of the permissive tax exemption policy. I would like to now highlight one of the applications as it was the focus of discussion in the previous year, which is Desert Sun Counseling. The Oliver location provides affordable housing for Town of Oliver and surrounding areas, which consist of 18 units varying in monthly rental rates of $450 to $660 per month. People who cannot pay are accommodated free of charge. Free of charge on-site services include the men's shed, which operates 5 days a week, 8 hours per day, the women's safe house, and the youth shelter, which is new for 2020. Other off-site services include counseling to the school district, child, youth, and parenting support for the Okanagan Correctional Center, senior support crisis line, and providing help to individuals in crisis. They provide supportive services to the most vulnerable members of the community so that all community members experience enhanced quality of life. The Society's financial statements indicate working capital in excess of $250,000 as of March 31st, 2019. The annual operating budget for the Society is in excess of $573,000. The Society receives monies from the Ministry of Justice, Boys and Girls Club, School District 53, Province of BC, Corrections, Literacy Now, and donations. All of Desert Sun services are provided at no charge or just enough to cover the cost of the program. Any monies received are used on enhancing supportive programs. Desert Sun was awarded a 50% exemption by Council in the 2020 taxation year. During the exemption discussions in the previous year, Council decided to cut the permissive tax exemption bylaw down to 1 year in length from the traditional 4 years. This was solely due to the Desert Sun's application. Council wanted more information before granting any further exemptions to Desert Sun. Most notably, Council wanted to see if BC Assessment granted them a Class 3 supportive housing designation for the 2020 taxation year. For 2020, BC Assessment did not grant the Class 3 designation to Desert Sun, and they remain classified as Class 1 residential. Desert Sun is asking again this year for a 100% exemption, but it remains within Council's power to grant any percentage of exemption or no exemption at all. There are 2 other properties which have requested permissive tax exemptions relating specifically to affordable housing. However, these properties are owned by Kiwanis Senior Citizen Society and were grandfathered in under Section 220 of the Community Charter and are 100% permissively exempt because of this. This year, there were no new applications received for the 2021 permissive tax exemption cycle. In total, we received 1 less application for 2021. This was due to the Okanagan Portuguese Club no longer continuing operations into 2021. In summary, the 2021 total permissive tax exemptions are estimated to total $97,000. Public notice requirements are prescribed by Section 227. This notice must provide an estimate of taxes that would have been paid over the term of the bylaw if the properties were not exempt by Council. A copy of the draft notice, Attachment 2, shows an estimate of $435,000 that would be exempt if Council grants exemptions to all applicants as requested for the 4-year cycle. No new applications were received for the 2021 cycle. The only other major change for 2021 was the location change for the library, who moved to Anthem Place Mall during 2020. All other applications are comparable to previous years. And with that, I will bring my report to a close. Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll take any questions or comments.
Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had one question. Item number 4, Oliver Kiwanis Senior Citizens Housing. I'm assuming that that is actually the market, the Kiwanis market, as opposed to the housing, because I think I just wanted clarification there.
Yes, it is the market. They also have the Senior Citizens
Right.
Center, which they're trying to get the land around it, also exempt. But under Section 220, they already get it. So the property that you're asking about, what roll number is that?
You just have it listed under number 4 on your report, Oliver Kiwanis Senior Citizens Housing.
Right, and that's the land surrounding the seniors housing. But in that case,
well, it says purpose of running a people's market, collecting donations.
yeah. So they also have they also have other properties. So the one that you're asking about, listed as number 4, that was a senior citizens housing, and they're asking for the land surrounding the senior citizens housing to be exempt. But under Section 220, they automatically they get the permissive tax exemption. The other properties they have.
This one was listed under 224.
224.
Yeah.
So that must be then the market.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's listed as housing in our report, but it's actually the market.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Well, seeing no hands, I will make a comment that I am unable to support the permissive tax exemption the way with the Desert Sun getting 100%. And I think I need to make myself clear. I came up with a number of reasons last year, but I will settle it down to one reason, which is I really truly believe that you should be able to in order to get a permissive tax exemption, you should qualify because you're using the land and improvements and providing that service on those land and improvements. To get a tax exemption for affordable housing and take that money and use it elsewhere in the community does not fit into our policy. It does not sound like the right way because we have no way of knowing how that money is being spent. Now, I know Desert Sun Consulting is a tremendous outfit and does a ton of work for the community, but somebody else could try the same thing or request the same thing, and we may not know how they might spend that money or the quality of the outfit, but we would have created a precedent by allowing people to get a tax exemption and not deliver that those services on the land and improvements. Last year we gave 50%, which I think was a bit of a stretch, but there is a men's shed there is a safe house there, and now this year there's a youth shelter. So for me, I'm unable to support it with 100% tax exemption. And the reason why is I think that you should be delivering all those services through the land and improvements on that site, not spending the money elsewhere in the community. Councillor Ventimiglia?
Well, I'll jump in because I don't see any other hands. So when I saw this report come back in its entirety, I was a bit surprised. I thought that last year we had only asked for the Desert Sun portion to come back. But I see a hand and a head shaking, so I'm wrong.
CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. A permissive tax exemption bylaw covers everyone. So we weren't able to separate out Desert Sun from the original bylaw. So that's why it was just a one-year bylaw.
Okay. So then to that, I would say that in my opinion, the way that I read the policy, I do believe that Desert Sun Counseling and Resource meets the criteria for an exemption. I just feel that the work that they do in our community is important. This is a tool that we have to be able to aid them in that, and I think that we want to do all that we can to ensure that the services that they provide remain in the community for our citizens to take advantage of. So I do support it.
Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly understand the perspective that you're coming from. I felt the same way last year. I'm not sure that I feel any different this year. I would also put in that if BC Assessment doesn't see them as supportive housing and give them that designation, then I'm not sure that we should see them that way as well. I'm not sure why they are unable to get the designation from BC Assessment, similar to what the Kiwanis does and the other class, the particular class. But if they're viewed as residential, then I think that the tax should at least stay at the 50% level. I'd be quite willing to support the 50% level as we did last year. Recognizing that, yes, it's more of a burden for them, but I think that in the last year that they've demonstrated that it's not an onerous burden, that it is reasonable for them to pay that amount of tax.
Councillor Grice.
Thank you, Worship. I wish I was better prepared for this because I'm surprised that I'm having to speak in favor. I thought that this was going to be sort of go through without question, but I would certainly also speak in favor of Desert Sun receiving 100% exemption. Obviously, the work that they do in the community is admirable and needed, and even within the land itself, they're providing a service to the community. I mean, if you look at the rates that they're renting to people, I mean, that's far below market rate. So that's, what's happening on that site itself. I mean, I feel that 100% of that site is being used for philanthropic purposes and for the benefit of the community. So I would speak in favor of the full 100% exemption. Thank you.
Councillor Schwarzenberg.
Well, why not? Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go with the mayor and Councillor Mattis on this one. I think if BC Assessment doesn't see them as Class 3, we're setting a bad precedent that somebody with a Class 1 designation can apply for 100% exemption. So I think we should stick with our 50% exemption unless BC Assessments changes their mind on that one.
So,
Councillor Mattis.
on that basis, I would make the motion that staff be directed to rewrite the permissive tax exemption bylaw 1398 to include a 50% tax reduction for the desert counseling. Desert Sun.
CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair, we do have to have this bylaw adopted by the end of the month. So it might be better if you give it first, second, and third reading as amended by reducing the tax exemption for Desert Sun from 100% to 50%.
I didn't realize we were operating under that type of time frame. It's unfortunate it's this late in the game, but I would absolutely go along with that the council give first, second, third reading as amended by reducing the tax exemption for Desert Sun counseling to 50% exemption land and improvements.
I will second that.
Second,
I have a question.
Yep, Councillor Schwarzenberger.
And this is through the chair to the CAO. So if the whole premise of this is BC Assessment's classification, would it be prudent to do this for 1 year again, or should we do it for 4 years?
CEO.
Through the chair to Councillor Schwarzenberger, you can do it for the 4 years because we do have the ability to amend the bylaw each year if there are some changes or other requests are put forward to us.
Thank you.
Councillor Mattis.
I would agree with Councillor Schwarzenberger that 4 years would be the way to go. It would be less onerous on all of the other people involved in this, and it would also allow Desert Sun the opportunity to come back and ask us to amend within that period of time.
Any other questions, comments, Council?
I would just make the
Councillor.
comment that I would, I spoke in favor of the 100% exemption, and that would be my preference, but looking around the table, this is clearly the favorite option, and so I will be voting in favor of it.
Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Going to correspondence, I'll pass it over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The correspondence report is attached for September 8th. There is one item requiring council action. A piece of correspondence received on August 26, 2020 from the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association, Alliance of Beverage Licensees, and the BC Craft Brewers Guild. They're first thanking Oliver for expanding outdoor dining in our municipality and requested support for expanded patio permissions. The recommended, the options for council is that council may wish to consider the three options identified by this group of three. One, to expedite applications for businesses to winterize patios. Two, to approve temporary patios for summer 21 now to enable operators to plan ahead. And three, to create a program for designated pickup zones to enhance countless curbside pickup in the fall and winter, or council may wish to receive and file.
Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Worship. Question through to the administration. Do we have any applications for businesses to winterize public patios, or do we have any temporary patios in place now that we would be allowing for next year?
Through the chair to Director Mattis, we do not have any applications and have not received any other applications in the past with regards to expanding patios onto public property.
Councillor Grice.
Thank you, Worship. Did the Fire Hall Brewery not make an application?
Not to expand onto public property.
Oh, okay. I have another question as well, if I may, Your Worship.
Yep.
Is the request for us to create the program for pickup zones, or would that be up to the individual business, or who is creating that program?
From reading the correspondence, it looks like to create a program for designated pickup zones to enhance countless curbside pickup in the fall and winter.
So that would be for us to do it like outside of pizza places or restaurants to create specific pickup zones.
It may be on corners of Main, for the pizza place, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure that there's a need for us to get involved in any one of these.
Councillor Bentamina.
Yeah, so my first thought when I read this request was that, yes, we should do our best to expedite any applications that come forward if businesses were to want to winterize their patios, or were to perhaps want to look at setting up a contactless pickup station, maybe in one of the public parking stalls in front of their business or on a street corner, something like that. We should do our best to facilitate that and get rid of any red tape that may be in the way, but I don't know if there's a need for us to set up the program ahead of time.
Okay. Did you have a question, Councillor Schwarzenberg?
I did.
Okay.
Not a question, but just a comment. I think, as the CAO said, if we haven't had any applications, we would obviously, as we already do, expedite any things we could to make an application go through quickly, or especially if they're looking for a patio for summer of 2021, we could expedite that. But I think I would move we just receive and file.
I'll second that.
Seconded. CAO, did you have a comment?
Just for council's knowledge, over the COVID period when it was first, when restaurants were providing a pickup, then most places were shut down. Staff for some of the other businesses were parking in areas, and we were asked to provide some education and make sure that there was areas cleared in front of businesses to allow for pickup, and we did do that through our bylaw enforcement.
I'm in support of receive and file. If we get any applications or requests for this type of modification or a patio or winterizing a patio, I don't know if we have anyone to winterize, but or anybody has one that they want to winterize, but we would do our best to accommodate, absolutely. We have a motion for, okay, we will, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Your Worship. And moving on to, for information items, correspondence from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch. They've issued an updated policy for the extension of temporary hours of sale and delivery. The second piece of correspondence for information is correspondence dated September 2nd, 2020 from Osoyoos and Oliver Taxi. They're providing notification to the municipality of a pending increase in taxi rates of 2.3%. This notice is for information for local governments, and comment or action is not necessary. The recommended resolution is that the above correspondence and the weekly mail correspondence be received.
Move
So
received.
Move. Second. Any comments? I saw a hand move over there. CEO. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to reports, the building permit activity report.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to provide just a quick update to Council with regards to a piece of correspondence we received at the last meeting and the painted chairs that will be displayed in our community. We will be receiving 3 chairs next week, tomorrow or the following day, and we are looking at installing them in our new bridge park. So 2 chairs are painted by one individual and another one, and the artists are, one lives in Okanagan Falls and the other one is from Oliver.
Nice.
All right, we've got the building permit activity report. Does anybody have any questions? Have a mover to receive?
So moved.
Moved, Councillor Grice, seconded, Councillor Ventimiglia. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to councillor reports. Councillor Mattis.
Thanks, Your Worship. August 28th, the Bridge Park unveiling. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Councillor Ventimiglia.
Thank you. On Tuesday, August the 25th, I attended a public information meeting, a virtual public information meeting regarding the rezoning of the land on which is situated Loose Bay, so to formalize the use of the space as a campground. On Thursday, the 27th, I attended, along with the mayor and a few others, a preview of the upcoming District Wine Village, which is located in St. Coolman Business Park, just north of town. It's, so just a quick update, supposed to open or due to open late next spring, and I think it's going to be a fantastic addition to the wine region as a whole. And they're just as of, I think, a couple of weeks ago now, including an outdoor skating rink in the plans, an outdoor winter skating rink, so that's also going to be great to add to our shoulder season activities in the south. Friday the 28th was the official opening of Bridge Park, as mentioned by Councillor Mattis, and last Thursday the 3rd was Regional District Committee and Board meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Ventimiglia. Councillor Grice.
Thank you, Worship. Wednesday, August 26th, I virtually attended a discussion with the committee in regards to a cold weather shelter for Oliver. Friday, August 28th was the Bridge Park unveiling, as well as today's meetings. And just wanted to mention that I've submitted my video to SILGA, the Southern Interior Local Government Association, as I'm requesting support for a position of Director at Large. So I hope I have Council's support when it comes time to vote. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Councillor Grice. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Worship. I attended the Bridge Park opening, which I thought was a great event. OIB Council and Chief Clarence Louis were there, along with some elders, and just a wonderful event. Too bad more people couldn't attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. August 17th, along with Councillor Ventimiglia, and I think MLA Linda Larson was there, and Mayor Vasilaki from Penticton, among a few others, toured the district wine village on August 18th, our Bridge Park unveiling. Yeah, that is a really awesome little place, and those chairs are going to make it even better. I see a lot of people certainly wanting to spend some time sitting there. September 1st, I had a meeting with Chief Louis. Main reason for the meeting was around getting OIB to commit to support for a cast table in the South Okanagan here, which I was able to do, and it ended up being about an hour and a half conversation where we discussed racism and Indigenous relations, among other things. It was some quality time that I actually got to spend with Chief Louis, so it was really good. September 2nd, I had a lunch meeting with Santiago Silly. He's the CEO for Phantom Creek Winery. We had talked about getting together during their grand opening, having some discussion around the legacy project. Phantom Creek would like to do something to help Oliver become a place to stop, just not a place you go through on a destination to somewhere else. Santiago has recently been elected to the board of the BC Wine Institute, and one of the things he's passionate about is getting some wine education into our South Okanagan area. One of the things the wineries are challenged with is getting really qualified people that have a lot of technical knowledge around winemaking. So, and also when I discussed with him around the wine tasting room and our appetite to get a pilot for a wine tasting room, he thought that was a great idea. So I'm going to get him some additional information from our meetings at UBCM last year, and he's going to see if he can leverage any influence he might have through the BC Wine Institute to help us maybe get a pilot. Nice. And as Councillor Grice did, I also shot a video for UBCM up at the Gold Tees, the 9th tee box on Fairview Mountain. If you have a look at it, I thought my golf swing was a lot prettier than it actually is, which explains a lot of the reason I'm losing balls regularly. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. Thanks to the corporate officer and the CEO for helping me make that video. Our next meeting is September 21st, 2020, and acting mayor schedule for September, October, and November is Councillor Ventimiglia. Any questions, Tom? Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, Council.